Hello and welcome to this interview with Bishop nominee Pastor Scott Johnson. I am Pastor Steve Berkey, a member of the Bishop Election Committee. This interview with Pastor Johnson is one of our series of interviews with the nominated bishop candidates. In June of this year, 2022, we will elect a bishop at the Nebraska Synod Assembly. This series of videos provides Assembly voting members with an opportunity to get to know the nominees that were raised up at February cluster meetings, supporting their discernment process about who our next bishop might be. So each interview is conducted by a member of the Bishop Election Committee, and it includes the same 5 questions that each candidate has been provided in advance. So we will start with the introduction. Pastor Scott, please introduce yourself.
Well, good morning or afternoon, whenever you're watching the video. I'm Scott Johnson. I am currently serving as Director of Campus Ministries at Midland University in Fremont, Nebraska. I'm a native Nebraskan. I was born and raised in Wakefield, baptized at Salem Lutheran Church up in Wakefield and confirmed there. And I was pretty much about as stereotypically Nebraska farm boy as you can come. Raised on a multi-generational farm here, grew up dreaming of playing football for the Cornhuskers, finished a couple inches short of what I would have needed to be to play back in those days, but did my undergrad in Lincoln at the University of Nebraska, BA in classics, and actually began college I was planning to be a band director. Started as a music major, but through some work at Carol Joy Hollingkamp when I was a student and also the campus ministry at the University of Nebraska, discerned a sense of calling to ministry and wound up switching majors and then going off to receive my MDiv from Luther Seminary in 2003. Trying to keep this as brief as I can. I've served 4 different calls. My first was at a small Lutheran parish in Barrett, Minnesota, as part of the Northwestern Minnesota Synod. I spent a few years in campus ministry at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. And then most recently, before coming to Fremont, I was the pastor at St. Petri Lutheran Church in Story City, Iowa. And that was in the Northeastern Iowa Synod. My wife, Kristen, is a deacon. She specializes in youth and family ministry, and we have 2 daughters. Ainsley is 15, Alana is 13, and we have a lovable old black lab named Jack, who kind of keeps us all on our best behavior. And we live here in Fremont.
Great. Thank you. What would you say are your gifts and strengths as a religious leader, and how does that apply to being a bishop?
I think one of the things I'm beginning to sense over the years is I'm not a gifted administrator, but I have a good sense of the feel of a community, and I pay a lot of attention to different aspects of how a community is existing together. And one of the ideas I've kind of been tuning over in my head, not only as the discernment process for this election goes, but in my work here as campus pastor at Midland, is how do we learn as a community to live well together? I'm a deep aficionado of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and one of the phrases he used about the church was that it was a community gathered under Christ with one another and for one another. And part of the way that I understand ministry, as far as I have practiced it as a pastor, is learning how to encourage people to live well together, to find common ground as much as possible, and especially, this is the one that's really surfacing for me lately, to learn how to be uncomfortable together. The church is looking at a time in coming years that are going to be very difficult. Religious research is telling us that the fastest growing parts of our population, you're going to hear this over and over again in this election, is the spiritual nones, N-O-N-E-S. And there is a rising sense of secularity. And that means that the church is going to be in a position that we really haven't been in before, because we've always been in a kind of a privileged position that is rapidly disappearing and in fact has completely vanished in a lot of the places, even here in Nebraska. So as the church, we're going to have to learn how to be uncomfortable together. Part of my work has lately been thinking about that and how do we embody those values of faith and life together when it's not just something that's handed to us, but something we have to practice sometimes, not so much in secret, but almost under the radar.
Thanks. Could you reflect on your sense of call as you consider serving as a bishop of the Nebraska Synod?
It's a bit overwhelming. To be perfectly frank, I'm not certain that, well, I don't think anyone's completely ready for that position. I'm still discerning myself what it means to even let my name go forward. I said back when I was nominated in February, I was surprised my name went forward out of our local cluster. But some of my mentors in ministry have gone through this, and they simply said, until I had that voice from the Holy Spirit that's clearly said no, to let the church's wisdom serve. And that meant to let your name go forward unless there was a clear sign that, no, this is not the thing to which you're called. I will say, whoever is elected bishop is going to need a very gifted team around them and a good sense of how to bring people together to serve a common purpose. And I think that might be something that I could bring to the table as a bishop. Certainly, I would want to acknowledge the need for gifted people around me, because there are things that any one of us are going to have that we're not very good at, that we're going to need people that can fill those roles and work together to accomplish the work that God's calling us to.
Fourth question is, what core theological values are most evident in your speaking, teaching, leading, and living? That sounds like a long question.
It is. The fun part is trying to get all this done briefly, right? Well, I mentioned I did my MDiv at Luther Seminary, and I had the great good fortune to be in one of the last classes that Gerhard Forde taught as a professor at Luther Seminary. And I would say that the biggest influences in the way that I look at the church and the world are Martin Luther, obviously, but also as interpreted through the lens of people like Gerhard Forde, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and what's commonly come to be known as the theology of the cross, or people who call themselves theologians of the cross. The idea that the most faithful way to live together as Christians is to do our best not to sugarcoat things, to do our best to acknowledge our limitations, to do our best to acknowledge our failures, the myriad ways that we are captive to sin and cannot free ourselves. And that phrase in and of itself, that's been part of my faith since I was a kid. One of my earliest church memories is actually the Sunday that Salem took out the old service book and hymnal, the old red hymnal, and brought in the Lutheran Book of Worship. And like a lot of churches, they settled on setting one in that book and just kind of sat with it for a while, to the point that if you held the hymnal so that the binding was in your hand like this and then just opened your hand, the hymnal would automatically pop open to the page where that order for confession and forgiveness started. And that phrase, we confess that we are in bondage to sin and cannot free ourselves, something I just grew up with, and still I'm just so aware of our failings and our frailties, the many ways that we disappoint one another. And at the same time, the theologian of the cross understands that these are the people that God comes to save, that God doesn't save us in our best moments, that God doesn't save us in our triumphant successes, but incorporates all of who we are. And God goes all the way down into death, into our death and the death of the world, to say, this is my beloved. These are the people I have come to save.
About 1 minute.
Thank you. So that would be kind of the core values. There is that understanding that the church gathers as a community, but it's under the cross, and we can't let go of either reality.
Thanks. Last one, if you were to become bishop, which areas or priorities would you most likely focus on as you would begin?
I've been away from Nebraska for a long time, even though I returned to Nebraska in 2019 to take up this call at Midland. I've spent a lot of time away. So my first priority would be to get out into the state. I still haven't had a chance to do a whole lot of that, even now that COVID is lifting. I'd want to get out into the state and get to know people. A lot of the places that I've known in my lifetime have changed quite a bit in the years that I've served in other places. And a lot of them I didn't know very well because I've never traveled to those parts of the state. So I'd want to get to know the synod as a whole. And then I'd want to start crafting ways that we could continue to live well together as that community. Again, with one another, for one another. It's been the best way that I've been a pastor and the best communities that I've been able to serve in. And it seems like a good way to look at going forward as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Pastor Scott Johnson. And
welcome.
Today in answering these questions, we wish you the best in your own discernment about a potential call as Bishop of the Nebraska Synod. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.